is probably going to be the beginning of a change in the tone, tenor, and direction of my video essays. By and large, I intend to place more of an emphasis on examining the media, the impact that they have on us, and what we can do about it. So the first foray into this new direction is going to be starting with one of Disney, the monster that's eaten the universe's little properties, the upcoming Black Panther movie. So after 50 some odd years of languishing in obscurity, the Black Panther finally comes to the big screen in 2018. And my reaction to this news? So the hell what? Now, for those of you who don't know, I need to give the backstory about this before I go ahead and launch into the meat of the subject. Black Panther is a comic book character who's been around since the 1960s, and his origins are pretty unflattering, to put it nicely. He was created by the legendary Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, two of the greatest legends in comic books, in fact, the two greatest. But when the character was originally created, his name wasn't Black Panther, as this sketch done by Jack Kirby himself proves. He was originally called the Coal Tiger. Interesting. And no, there's nothing wrong with your monitor. His costume is yellow, which begs the question, why the hell would they call him the Coal Tiger? He's one of the first clues that his costume meant nothing to do with him as an intellectual property. This was more of an inside joke, I would take it. It's just one of those things that pale males like to do that makes them chuckle incessantly. Well, even though his terrible name and costume were discarded, the new costume that they came up with for their Black Panther character wasn't much better. They just gave him a black body stocking and left it at that. This isn't merely laziness. This is blatant disregard. This wasn't a couple of amateurs or newcomers. This was Stan Lee and Jack Kirby at the very height of their popularity and their prowess, at a time when Stan Lee was creating the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, X-Men, and in a few years will be creating Daredevil. This is the first black character that Marvel Comics had. I know some of you will say it was the Falcon, but I'm just talking about with his own book. Now, the way that Lee and Kirby tried to throw people off of their scent was by claiming that, counter to the stereotype, this Black Panther character is an African king who comes from the most technologically advanced nation on Earth. Okay, interesting, but look at how they frame their technologically advanced empire. Exciting jungle action. Yeah, I know that this was the 1960s, and yeah, comics were still mostly for kids under the age of 12 at a time when black nationalism or black consciousness were unheard of, and there were no black people pushing back against stereotypical representations like this. But you know how I feel about the white cop-out. It was a product of its time. Because that sounds and smells like bullcrap to me. And while Wakanda is supposed to be so technologically advanced, you wouldn't know it by looking at the people. And this has only remained consistent over the decades. It hasn't gotten any better. Now, if you happen to like Black Panther as a concept, and I'm not so naive as to believe that many of you don't, well, we gotta be honest. It's because we didn't have any mass media intellectual property of our own like him. It's understandable, especially if you grew up on comic books, but all media is about social influence. And that influence also includes comic books. Haven't I always told you that media isn't about entertainment? It's about mind control? Now, Stan Lee has suddenly, the last few years, discovered his adoration for Black Panther. Now, he has said more about Black Panther in the last 12 months than he has in the previous 50 years. To hear Stan Lee talk about it, Black Panther is his favorite character of all time. Gee, you wouldn't know by the way that he handled the character. The decades passed, but Marvel's treatment of its first black superhero hasn't improved one iota. Now, by way of necessary admission, I need to get it on the record that I used to read comic books when I was a teenager, back in the early 1990s. And no, I don't think ill of anybody who's over the age of 18 and still reads them. I know that the material was pretty racy back then, and it's only gotten more so now, so this is not a juvenile medium type rant. But the reason that I don't read comic books anymore, and that I've only seen a handful of those Marvel movies, is because at the end of the day, I'm looking for something for black people. I'm just that serious about it. This is not to say that there's something wrong with you if you do, but I'm wondering when the hell are we going to get off the bench and get into the game? Now, Marvel Comics is owned by Disney. So when you see Marvel Comics, I'm talking about the comic books pushing homosexuality, that's actually Disney pushing it. When you see people being hired at Marvel, they're actually being hired at a Disney subsidiary. And this brings us to Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now, for all of you who wonder why I don't have anything to do with the so-called conscious movement, it's because they tend to create chumps like this. And this guy's parents clearly heard of Kemet. They even named him with a Kemet name. And look what he turned into. Kind of like Charlemagne the Coon, Charlemagne the Clown, Charlemagne the God. He uses 5%er talk and then turns right around and fawns over the likes of Lena Dunham and Tommy Lauren. Bad enough that he's sitting here chasing after some white women, but for God's sake, he chose the bottom of the barrel, women who hate black people, and that tells you everything you need to know about him. By the way, on a side note, Charlemagne the Coon just put out a so-called book called Black Privilege, Opportunity Comes to Those Who Create It. I've always told you that the white media doesn't put on any black people who are not on team white supremacy. And that goes double for Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's the guy who Marvel Comics chose to write their reboot of Black Panther last year. I'm sure that his name is familiar to you, and it should be because he's Chris Hayes' black friend. You probably have seen him once or twice on MSNBC and a few other outlets.
The supplies we're after are being moved by a Merryweather convoy. Intercept at the point marked on your GPS and bring them back to the bunker.
That subject. So the fact that he seems to be a constant media darling of the white media, that ought to tell you something. He's your typical black left-wing shill. He thinks only inside the predetermined parameters given to him by his white masters. He regurgitates the same talking points, pushes their agenda aggressively, and while he did endorse reparations on paper, he's also been a hell of a lot more vocal and aggressive about promoting gay marriage and legalizing immigrants. He's one of those black people who uses the type of unthreatening language that dances around the edges of white supremacy without ever coming up the middle. He's the kind of black person who's guaranteed not to offend white conservatives, nor to give white liberals any heartburn either. And don't ask me to go easy on him because he wrote a book that mentioned reparations. One good position can be utterly negated, if not obliterated, by taking up 3 bad positions. I don't know whose idea was to put Ta-Nehisi Coates on the payroll over at Marvel, but he's only the latest in a series of bad ideas for the creative team to lead a Black Panther title. They had one of the Hudlin brothers on the book back some time ago. Coates has no background in comic books. He's a liberal columnist for The Atlantic, among some other publications. And even if I did approve of his stances on the issues, he does us very little good because by his own admission during a joint interview with Chris Hayes, he's been asked to be on numerous TV programs, but he's very shy, as he put it, so he turns them down. Very shy. And if you had seen him when he made this admission, he was acting like a straight-up female, and a white one at that, shrugging his shoulders, aw shucks, head to the side. Now, I'm not going to go and call him outright gay, but I will say he's sexually suspect.
You in position? Merryweather are inbound. Stop the convoy, get the supplies, drop them at the bunker. Out.
He is an unthreatening Negro. Now, if you want to know why Marvel brought in Ta-Nehisi Coates. Consider this. He has no background in that business. And to give you a window as to his mentality, he was quoted as having said, "When I was a kid, Spider-Man was right under Malcolm X for me in terms of heroes." How interesting. So Peter Parker is right up there with Malcolm X in the mind of Ta-Nehisi Coates. See, when people like him come into the white media, they could give less than a damn about telling a story. They see it as nothing more than a soapbox for them to stand on and spout their ridiculous leftist dogma, which has nothing to do with black people. And so he did. He made Black Panther into a clumsy front for his own liberal ideology that, of course, is white-tested, white-approved. In an article in The Guardian, Ta-Nehisi Coates was quoted as having said, "It costs comic books way less than movies to do diverse things." But when someone like Coates says diverse, he doesn't mean black. He means black gays, black hunchbacks, black transgender. In other words, black is only an incidental to him. It's totally unimportant. Black people don't need diversity or equality or power. And black is only important to the extent that it can be used to promote something other than black. So whenever you see someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates deciding to promote black people, it's only incidental. You better look for what the other adjective is next to black to find out what his real agenda is. And let's get something else on the record. LGBTQs are only 3% of the population, tops. Black people are, if we go with the government's figures, 4 times that much. So what sane person can have any reason for pushing LGBTQ as if they are the only people in the society? Because that's what we've been seeing for several years now. Of course, all you have to do to find out the answer is to check out the sexual orientation of many of the people at the top of media to find out the answer. For example, Bryan Singer, director of X-Men, he's a homosexual, as is Ian McKellen. Anna Paquin, who played Rogue, she claims to be bisexual, but by all accounts, she leans more toward girls than guys. Ellen Page, who played Kitty Pryde in one of the X-Men movies, she, of course, is a long-standing lesbian. And those are just the high-profile ones from one movie franchise in particular. And it doesn't just stop with the movies. You can look at the kids' cartoons if you want other examples. Susan Blue, voice acting director and the voice of RC on the Transformers cartoon way back in the 1980s. She's a lesbian, has been for decades. Go on the internet and see her taking her vows with her lifestyle partner, James Flinders. He did the voice of Leonardo back in the day on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He's a homosexual, been a homosexual activist for decades now. Now, although this may surprise you, try to understand, these people were gay back then in the 1980s. The only difference is you didn't know it. And that was the reason that Marvel Comics chose this chunk. They want a black face to push a white agenda. See, Marvel, or should I say Disney, like a lot of media, has gotten on the LGBTQ kick, and they decided that Black Panther was going to be their chosen stalking horse to go undercover queer. And don't just take my word for it, Ta-Nehisi Coates came in the door saying what it was that he intended to do, and all of these white media outlets, particularly online, decided to push this chump like he was the second coming. Now, these guys didn't have anything good to say about Ta-Nehisi Coates before, but all of a sudden they love this guy, kind of like they did with Issa Rae. See, black people are invisible until the white powers that be can make use of them. In The Guardian's article, they were blatantly propagandizing people to tout Coates' book as being great even before it was published. Quote, Coates' story, no matter how good it is, and it's likely to be great. This is a guy who's a social critic, not a comic book writer. He's never written fiction, at least that's not what he calls his articles. He's never even written a comic book. And this is what the white media was saying about him in September 2015 more than 6 months before Coates' first Black Panther issue had even been published. There weren't any samples to show at this point, so merely the announcement of Coates as the writer justifies saying that his work is likely to be great. But he is what the Soviets used to call politically reliable, so the quality of his work is irrelevant. Coates is a known quantity to the white media, and as we found out, he didn't disappoint them. When Coates' Black Panther run began, he introduced the idea of an all-female so-called bodyguard for King T'Challa, though they don't spend a whole lot of time protecting him. They're a bodyguard who apparently likes to run missions for the king as well. So are they a bodyguard, a special forces strike team, or both? Ta-Nehisi Coates apparently isn't very sure. And if they run missions for the king, then what the hell does he need to gallivant around with the Avengers for? Just send his killer female harem to handle things, since apparently they're a lot tougher than all the men in Wakanda. See, this is a form of emasculation. You got this so-called black writer putting together this fictional black kingdom where the black man needs his woman to protect him because he's too weak to do it himself. There is no validation of black masculinity. The black man as protector, provider, able to face down all threats and to be able to give the answers to his people. That's not what Ta-Nehisi Coates is selling. But this was only the beginning of the limp-wristed writer Coates' effery. See, he had an agenda when he signed on with Marvel. Being a flaming lefty, it wasn't long before he got to what he really wanted to do, and that was indoctrinate what he hopes are young readers with accepting the gay lifestyle. So he creates two characters whose only purpose is to fawn over one another nonstop. This is what T'Challa's all-female bodyguards are about. They don't concern themselves with protecting the king, not like it's their job or anything. Their real interest isn't making out with each other. It consumes most of their time together. Every time they show up on a page, it's just to make out. Every scene is either them making out or is them getting ready to make out. Coates' Black Panther proved itself to be unquestionably Marvel's most aggressively homosexual title, and it set a new low mark for how far they were willing to stoop to be able to dress black people up as stalking horses for an agenda. And even without seeing the sales figures, Marvel announced that they were going to launch a second Black Panther title. That's how you know the fix was in. Gee, Marvel had never been this aggressive about a black IP before, but of course it's not the black part that had Marvel so eager to expand Black Panther's presence. Their second Black Panther title is called World of Wakanda. And this time, the two lesbians would be front and center. Well, that didn't take long, now did it? They let Ta-Nehisi Coates choose who the scribbler for this second title would be, and he chose a raging lesbian, the appropriately named Roxanne Gay, to write
well
this
done.
second
Now the real work can get started in the lab.
Yes, she does look like the stunt double for Precious, now doesn't she? And if Coates was a bad pick to be a writer, this morbidly obese cow was the wrong pick. In an interview with the New York Times, Roxanne Gay said, and I quote, "The opportunity to write black women and queer black women into the Marvel Universe? There's no saying no to that." So she tells you right off the bat what her motivation is, and it's not to write great stories. Roxanne Gay does the opposite. She wears her ignorance of the company and the IP she's working on as a badge of honor. To her, it's a paycheck, nothing more. And she gets to dramatize her sick delusions on Disney's dime. She even had the gall to go on Twitter and tweet a comment about her being the first black female writer at Marvel, tweeting, "And no, it doesn't make sense that I am the first in 2016, but I won't be the last." Don't be so sure about that. We'll get to that part later on, but this is how this creature came in the door at Marvel. She walked in showing blatant disrespect and disdain for the very company want the readers to have an incoming writer talking like this? Well, as I'll point out in a little bit, it made a poor impression. But take notes, folks. Those of you who want to run a media venture one day, you better be damned careful about the talent that you choose to hire. As the movie producer Jerry Bruckheimer once said, you gotta make sure everyone there is trying to make the same movie. Roxane Gay's attitude should have been a deal breaker. Typically, when a new writer is brought onto a movie production or a comic book, they go on and on and on about how much they love the franchise and how they feel so proud to be part of it, to be contributing to it. But in her New York Times interview, Roxane Gay quipped that, quote, my agent was not thrilled that I was taking on another project. I haven't read any of the issues that Roxane Gay wrote, just like I haven't read any of the crap that Ta-Nehisi wrote. And apparently no one else did either. But this attitude of contempt for the company that she chose to work for tells you everything you need to know about why the comic book industry in general is doing gangbusters at the box office and is on life support at the bookstores. Roxane Gay doesn't know a damn thing about the very company that she's working for, doesn't care about comic books, and doesn't even like them. Like Ta-Nehisi Coates, to her, this is merely a platform for her to push her asinine obsession before she moves on to some other thing. Now, perhaps I'm being judgmental due to the company she keeps, but I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that she's a feminist. Perhaps it's the titles of the books that she's written, such as Bad Feminist and Difficult Women. This is who Ta-Nehisi Coates thought had the makings of a good comic book writer? Now, I know this is going to date me a bit, but from what I remember, Marvel has fallen quite a long way from the likes of Jim Starlin, whose works are forming the spine for half of Marvel's Phase 1 movies, by the way, specifically the Infinity War, to a bloated feminine like Roxane Gay. She is exactly the type of mouth-breathing half-wit that feminists adore and that the rest of the society can't stand. Sure, she wrote some fiction, all right, which I suppose puts her a couple of rungs higher than Ta-Nehisi Coates, but wait until you see what she wrote. Her debut novel was called An Untamed State. It's about a woman, the child of Haitian immigrants, who are rich and influential. What kind of Haitian immigrant parents are these? If her parents are rich and influential, then why the hell they immigrate? Anyway, the lead character in the book lives as an attorney in Miami, and she goes on a vacation to Haiti with her, wait for it, white husband and their mulatto child. The woman winds up being kidnapped because, hey, it's Haiti. Of course they would kidnap her. And her wealthy and influential father refuses to pay the kidnapper's ransom for some unknown reason. So the lead character is raped and mistreated by these Haitian men as a result. Now, if you're thinking Precious, Lee Daniels' entire filmography, the movie Midnight, and everything else that black homosexuals and lesbians write, then give yourself a gold star. Anytime they write about black people, it's always going to be totally insulting and make black people out to be morally deficient. Black men in particular will always bear the brunt of these attacks because black men have refused to capitulate one iota on our stance towards the lifestyle. So we're always going to be a particular target for them. And you won't be surprised to learn that Roxane Gay herself is the child of Haitian immigrants. Not their best and brightest, obviously. And this is how she portrays Haitians, not a semblance of human recognition for them. This is a woman who has learned to see the world through the eyes of white people. She's taken what she does in the bedroom and converted that to her entire identity. The black part, that's unimportant. Gay's entire run on this new Black Panther title was hailed by white online LGBTQ types from the jump sight unseen as Marvel's flagship LGBT title. Flagship LGBT title, huh? Well, they're not even trying to hide it. It's one thing to call something an agenda. This is an outright onslaught. When they say diversity, that means gay, full stop. It doesn't even mean diversity in lifestyle. black people as a shield to hide behind so they could get close to the levers of change and then Shanghai our movements at the last moment for their own benefit. Whether it's the civil rights movement or Black Lives Matters, they always pull the same scam, and black people just keep letting them get away with it. Gays live in an alternate universe, mostly in their own minds, where white supremacy doesn't exist. They push the lie that black people being murdered in a church is somehow not as important as gay people not being represented on this or that TV show or even comic book. To them, that's an actual equal comparison. They convince themselves that everyone is a closet homosexual. You, me, your person sitting next to you, and that it's heterosexual oppression that keeps all the people from finally being able to come out of the closet. Now, the gay online Gestapo will deny this until the day they die. At least whenever they're around heterosexuals, they'll deny it. But when you look at online message boards and at what they say on their own web-based platforms, this is exactly what they believe. They say that heterosexuality is in fact the minority, and that if only social norms could be relaxed, then the gay majority would feel confident enough to be who they are. This is not merely an obsession for them, it is insanity. This is not an attempt to change reality, this is a flat-out war on reality. And this is why no matter how many gay kisses they show, no matter how many people are shown engaging in homosexual behavior in print, on TV, or in movies, you could have Superman and Batman in a three-way gay tryst. It wouldn't be enough. They see the world through their crotch. And this is a bottomless well that can never be filled. So everyone that they meet is viewed through that prism. You can forget about storytelling. Let's just see one lurid sexcapade after the other. Each one more prurient than the last, or degenerate than the last. After all, that's the only thing about any story that can ever engage their attention, and they want to distort and pervert all media until it conforms to the same demented idea. Now, before I go any farther, I want to emphasize something. Marvel Comics is owned by Disney. The same guys who are shaping the Marvel Cinematic Universe are also the same ones reshaping the Marvel Comics universe. Marvel movies have been out for 10 years now. Ta-Nehisi Coates only came on board last year. So this isn't some new sea change or some out-of-the-blue development. This is merely part of a media strategy that has been in the offing a damn long time. You know, it says a lot about what inspires people to be creative. Some people are inspired by possibilities, others by things that exist that they wish didn't, and others by whatever tickles their crotch. When you elevate a bedroom practice to literally being your identity, then you suffer from a mental disorder. Well, what I was able to find, Ta-Nehisi Coates' first Black Panther issue sold 300,000 copies, according to Bleeding Cool, which made it the best-selling comic book of April 2016 when it debuted. Now, that's nothing to sniff at in an industry where if you're able to get 100,000 copies, you're in literally the top 3. Now, they were growing back then. Black Panther beat out all the Star Wars titles on sale that month, including the debut issue of Poe Cameron's title. But then later in the same article, Bleeding Cool pointed out that, quote, Bleeding Cool has reported on a slump in sales from 2016 based on 2015, and that continues. This year so far, 2016 is down 12% in terms of comics sold and 4% down in total revenues. This really isn't good. My, how their tune changed. All of this in the same article. So while they're bragging about the sales figures, the truth of the matter is 1 in 7 comic book readers walked away in the last 12 months alone. And this isn't good, they say? Damn right it's not. And while the white media made much hay out of their gay stalking horse selling 300,000 copies last year, The second issue of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther comic had dropped to 75,000 issues sold. According to Comicron.com, as of February 2017, the latest month for which sales figures are available, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Gay Panther is now down to 35,000 issues sold. Now, while it's natural to have a steep drop-off between the debut of a media item and its follow-up, whether it's a movie's opening weekend or a TV series premiere or a book series debut, it is not natural to have a drop-off of 75%, which is what happened to Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther series just between the first and second issues alone. Now, sure, you'll lose readers who either just wanted the first issue and nothing else, people who still think that comic books are collector's items, or those who, for whatever reason, figured out that the series wasn't for them, so they weren't going to continue reading it. But a year into your run, and you're still bleeding readers, that's like 3 or 4 major story arcs. That's a long time for people to still be figuring out whether or not they like your book. This isn't undecideds making up their minds. These are people who tried to hang in there, hoped that the stories would get better, and when they didn't, they found something else to read. I want you to dwell on those numbers for just a minute. In a year, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther series went from 300,000 copies sold for a debut issue down to a current 35,000 overall. So in the first month alone that he was on that book, 3 out of 4 people who bought the first issue didn't bother to come back for the second. And he's been steadily hemorrhaging readers ever since. And today's sales of his book are only 10% of what they were just 12 months ago. So in truth, if we want to be honest, Ta-Nehisi Coates has managed to run off 90% of the people who bought his book last year. No wonder he's announced that he's going to be leaving the Black Panther comic book at the end of this year. I guess he's decided to jump instead of waiting to be pushed, and when the Black Panther movie debuts in February next year, assuming Marvel is still publishing the book, the sales are going to jump for that month. And Coates will no doubt take credit for that. That is, assuming Marvel stops pretending that they're not going to cancel the book already. Oh, and as for what's-her-name, Gay's World of Lesbomania, it's only up to its 4th issue, and it's only selling half of what Ta-Nehisi Coates' book sells. A little over 17,000. Readers didn't bother to jump ship on World of Wakanda. They never got on board to begin with. But the thin end of the wedge had already begun to do its work, because we see what the online whining has been in regards to the upcoming Black Panther movie. Recently, the gay Gestapo was salivating to have an LGBTQ in a Marvel movie. And when it turned out that there would be the case, they went to a disc. Now, they're trying to make no gay people in a Marvel movie into a scandal all of a sudden, but only for the Black Panther movie. See, they didn't get upset over the dozen or so Marvel movies already been produced, or the TV shows that don't have gays in them. DC announced that Wonder Woman would indeed be a bisexual now, at least in the comic books. Well, with her highly anticipated movie coming out later this year, surely the gay Gestapo would be demanding that she be shown smooching women, right? Nope. She makes goo-goo eyes at Chris Pine, and you don't hear a peep from the online whining brigade. Wonder Woman is the first solo female comic book movie to come from the big boys since they started their own cinematic universes. And yet the same people who are trying to start a boycott against the Black Panther movie, a comic book character who they never even read, are curiously uninterested in the fact that Wonder Woman isn't going to be making out with women. And in the comic books, Iceman, yes, the one from the X-Men, has been retconned into a homosexual, but none of these online gay malcontents are furious that Fox still hasn't had Iceman with a boyfriend. Oh, but this black superhero that most of them don't know, never bought a single issue of his book, and don't give a rip about, if this black movie comic book character doesn't validate the lifestyle, then people should boycott. That's how you know this isn't grassroots. It's astroturf. We know why it is that it's so important to the gays that the homosexuals and lesbians be shown in children's fare. Because they understand that as long as there is this unspoken prohibition or this high resistance to putting gays into certain fiction media, what it means is that being gay is still considered to be perverted. That's what we need to go ahead and put out on the table. That's certainly what the gays perceive it to be. So as far as they're concerned, this is about making sure that gay isn't perverted. Sure, you can have teenage boys kissing teenage girls, and it can even be shown on Nickelodeon or Disney Channel. But what about two girls kissing each other? Isn't that the same thing? Society clearly says, no, it's not the same thing. Now, as I said before, Ta-Nehisi Coates will most likely be leaving Black Panther in 2018, not that it matters to me. Though it is interesting that Marvel has already announced that they will be taking no more solicitations for World of Wakanda. Now, for those of you who don't understand the lingo, solicitation is when the bookstores ask the publishers to send them more issues. In other words, the few bookstores who may be silly enough to ask for next month's World of Wakanda issue will be told by Marvel that there's not going to be one. Seems the flagship LGBTQ title at Marvel just sank. This is a lesson to be learned for everybody who wants to do something in media, but it's a cautionary tale of what not to do. DC Comics built their empire on the idea of their comic book characters being the new gods. Superman is Zeus, Wonder Woman is Diana, Aphrodite, whatever, Batman is Hercules, I don't know. But the point is, DC's characters are more mythological than human. You can look at Superman as a symbol, but you can't really be Superman. When Stan Lee and the boys came along to help Marvel get on its feet, they had the opposite idea. Marvel built their empire on characters who the reader could relate to. It was all about whether or not you could understand who they were, and they were not unattainable. But keep in mind, just because you want characters that the reader can relate to, that is not the same as identity politics. Kids could relate to Peter Parker because he was mistreated in school, he was put down by teachers, and largely overlooked in his peer group, but he knew that he was a hero underneath, and he proved it every night when he was away from his teen peers. He didn't like how he was treated, but he didn't need his teenage peers' validation either. He didn't need the validation of his teachers. He knew who he was, and even without having to win fistfights in school, he still stood up for himself. That's powerful for children at the most vulnerable point in their psychological development. Now, where in that is there room for whether Peter Parker likes kissing girls or guys? If you've decided that you just can't relate to a character unless they kiss someone of the same gender, if something that meaningless and trivial is a monumental requirement for you, if that's a must-have for you, then the problem doesn't lie with comics or with any other popular media for that matter. The problem is you. When your crotch is your identity, you wind up making it the end-all and be-all of your existence. That is a mental derangement, and we have to start having the courage to call it what it is. When you see people who talk about a TV show or a movie, and the first thing that comes out of their ignorant mouths is, who's sleeping with who? That's the only thing that engages them. They just made a confession to you that is all that's important to them. They are admitting to what's at the top of their totem pole of personal values. Obsessing over your same-sex fixation may interest and engage you, but it won't interest anyone lifestyle most aggressively is a large part of why they are both in enormous trouble. They make billions of dollars at the box office, but they can't beg anyone to drop $4.95 at the bookstore. So why are these same properties being embraced on the big screen, but treated like cancer in print? A large part of it is because they're not the same thing that they were anymore. I remember back when comics used to cost $1, and the price tag is a large part of the problem. 28 pages for $5? I'm afraid that's a bit much. As one comic book publisher once said, we made our fortune on lunch money and sticky dimes. Comic books have largely priced themselves out of the market. These days, they seem to be pricing themselves out of business, and there seems to be no common sense breaking out to this pig simple reality. You're not in an environment where you're going to be able to take what started off as a enjoyment for kids and was largely accessible to everyone because it was affordable, and then you raise the price 5 times as much more in 20 years than it went up in the previous 90 years, and then turn around and say, I can't understand why people aren't buying it. It's because it went from being a mass market item to being a boutique item. And you don't get to have mass market appeal when you're selling boutique items. But the problem for the comics industry is a lot more than merely the fact that they're pricing themselves out of existence. The problem happens to be with the product itself and how it's turning the public off. You see, the reason that the movies are doing so well and the comic books aren't is because the movies are still complying with what audiences expect. The movies still comply with societal norms. The stories are about the stories. As Ta-Nehisi Coates pointed out, comics are cheaper than movies. And clearly, for the people who make comic books, that means to them that they can concentrate on their own silly fixations. You can afford to have some flops, a lot in fact, because one mediocre selling comic book can absorb the losses of 5 to 10 failures. You can afford to deny reality and decide that your sexual obsessions are more important than sales because it won't necessarily sink the company, at least not immediately anyway. But the problem is a movie is a massive investment, and you can't play those same games with cinema. The movies are forced to conform to reality and not the prurient sexual games of the filmmakers. And this from an industry that's run by perverts, by the way. Granted, I haven't read a comic book since Sir Mix-a-Lot was relevant, but even I, with my limited knowledge of comic books today, know that the audience for comics has gotten a lot older and older. What that means is the same people who were reading comic books back when I was are the same ones reading them today. Problem is, no one else is. There's no younger people coming in to replace the older readers. That's how the comic book industry managed to survive for so long in the first place. And as the Gen Xers begin to abandon comics altogether, that's going to sound the death knell for the industry. Comics are not connecting with young readers, and there's a good reason for that. Young people want unencumbered escapism. They want high adventure. Does that mean there's absolutely no room for the lifestyle? Well, considering that they only make up 3% of the population, it's insane to see them in more than 3% of the books. When you decide that you're going to push a lifestyle that fully 97% of the people have nothing to do with and, truth be told, disapprove of, can you really say that you're surprised when they decide to find something else to do, something that doesn't offend them? Right now, the industry is bending over backwards to cater to 3% of the readers, and as a result, they're only pleasing 3% of the readers. These professional whiners who you see online who like to push all this game validation stuff, not surprisingly, they don't even read comic books. And in fact, most of them have open contempt for them. They only care about it to the extent that they can use it to push their own agenda. Kind of reminds you of Roxanne Gay, now doesn't it? It's like the Gamergate thing a while back. And
this doesn't look good. They were meant to bring the goods in by ship, but the ship isn't moving. You'll need to take out the crew before bringing the goods to the warehouse.
A lot of these so-called social justice racist types, kind of like the morons who were trying to put together their list of black men who they wanted off the internet. They try to find whatever they think is trending and jump out in front of it. This, what they were doing with comic books and with video games, is the media equivalent of that same stupid strategy. Video games were clearly where the people are, and they thought that they spied yet another opportunity to piggyback on some high visibility concept as the industry was, and to make it a proxy for their own social agenda. So, are we getting more female protagonists in video games yet? When are we getting that first openly gay video game character? These companies who do try to push the lifestyle seem to confuse what the news media thinks is important with what readers will think is important. And as they proved with the election of Donald Trump, the media has no clue what the public actually thinks. Or if they do, they don't care, to their embarrassment. Media companies are trolling for headlines, desperately trying to get attention for their own show by announcing that they're introducing so-and-so gay character, so-and-so lesbian, so-and-so bisexual, so-and-so transgender. Okay, and after we see two women slobbering on each other's faces, or watch Jeffrey Tambor running around in a skirt, then what? Businesses who have to invest tens, if not $100 or more billion into an IP are not about to ruin their business just to cater to some local minority of malcontents. They understand who their core audience is, and they're going to cater to them. Young people, and people in general who like speculative fiction, don't want your social angst. They don't want your feminist daddy issues or Peter Ram your sexual kink down their throats. They won't tolerate it. They want a character who they can relate to on a variety of levels, not some one-dimensional walking ad for gay love is no different than heterosexual love. These clowns think going after a kid's medium is some slick way that they can sneak their indoctrination into young minds. But they're wrong on two counts. First of all, comic books are not read by kids anymore. You're talking to a bunch of 30 and 40-year-olds now. And secondly, if you are going to try to feed somebody poison, it has to be delivered in a candy coating in order for it to work. Otherwise, they'll reject it outright. They still haven't learned that lesson yet. Unless you have compelling stories where the adventure is the star and not whomever is cornholing or carpet munching on whom, then don't expect anyone to stick around to see how the story turns out. Guys wearing spandex and having fights with crooks and galactic threats don't lend themselves to identity politics because their milieu is too fantastic for something that minor. Now, you can do identity politics with lesbian prison shows, but as the CW is finding out, trying to shoehorn the lifestyle into the DC TV universe is turning out to be a reading's nightmare. When comics choose to become a subsidiary of identity politics with a bunch of angry leftists determined to coerce people into believing what they believe, then they will kill what used to be the hottest thing in print. The problem with comics today is that they're stepping up to the readers with an agenda, and they are blatantly embracing a value system that the readers don't. The readers want escapist fantasy, but apparently comic books aren't interested in that anymore. So the readers are gravitating toward video games because they still want escapist fantasy there. Comic books today aren't about amazing adventure or heroes you can relate to for that matter. They're now all about identity politics for gays, lesbians, feminists, and about personal validation. They still have the nerve to call themselves superhero stories, but they're about characters who are neither super nor heroes. They take guys wearing tights and capes and reduce them to nothing more than petty teenagers with petty issues. They're all relationship dramas, and stupid ones at that. Petty romance stories where they display every conceivable variation on every possible type of romance, triangle, interaction, etc. No one cares about righting wrongs or saving the world. It's all about showing so-and-so how much you want to have a roll in the hay with them. Who's sleeping with who? The readers look at comic books as being a morality play writ large. Marketing has no use for that. And this disease has poisoned much of television as well.
Weird.
Practically every TV show is all about sex and people are having it. Meanwhile, the show on broadcast TV is The Walking Dead, which is mostly about people running from zombies.
I'm trying to know, this is a blizzard.
Game of Thrones.
What?
Sure has plenty
This Southern
sex,
California looks like Maine.
it's about politics in a fantasy setting. Look, we all have our social issues that we care about. I certainly wear mine as a badge of honor, but as I've always said, there's a big danger in falling in love with your own idea because you tend to overestimate its appeal. This is how comics became susceptible to this cancer and is now spreading it. Instead of imagining new stories, they instead want to focus on new romantic angles. And the readers are through with it. Comics have had romance genres, love stories before, but they never ever sold anywhere near the same as the superhero stuff. Now the entire industry has gone that same way. They've become a niche, and an unpopular niche at that. As black people, we need to be smarter than to allow others to trick us into things that we don't believe or agree with.
I like that.
You empower the things that you watch by giving it your time to show that that's what's important to you.
Sometimes you can't
and while the gay movement has failed to trick people into reading gay material to bait and switch them into accepting gay characters, the real question is, what the heck are we going to be doing to empower and promote ourselves when it comes to media? Yes, we need black heroes in fiction, but what we need are creators putting out the content. It has to come from us. Perhaps responsible black content creators haven't made quite enough works of quality yet, or important enough works to break through. The real question is, even if they presented these works to you, would you decide to accept them? Not because they were created by black people. That's the hustle that Marvel and the white media try with Ta-Nehisi Coates. But the reason you should accept them is if they're good stories, well told, with characters that you can relate to, and compelling situations whose outcomes that you want to stick around to see the conclusion of. As I've always said, the point of media is to promote a value system. We see the one that Marvel is pushing. Does it matter to you what value system the media you consume is promoting? It does to me. If it's something that I don't approve of, then I don't complain about someone else handling their media property in a way that I don't like. Instead, I would create my own.
Yeah.
Look, if you like Black Panther and you plan to go see it, I know a lot of you do. That's fine. As a concept, I suppose it's basically okay. That's me being generous. I don't condemn anyone if they like the CGI-powered slugfest at the multiplex. I'm able to overlook some of the more odious aspects of some of these movies, but I really wish that we would start generating our own responsible works created by people pushing a value system that honors and magnifies us. We need a vision for the future, a representation that we can aspire to, symbols of us as we were and can be again. You're not going to get that from Marvel, folks. Hell, why does Black Panther matter so much to black people anyway? You want to know why? It's because to you, when you look at Black Panther, what you really see is a validation from the dominant society. You have them saying, one of you is good enough, but only one. You didn't have to put up the money to make the movie. Well, actually, you did in the form of the money that you paid for their other movies, but black folks haven't made that connection yet. So, as long as some white media company is ponying up the money for the production and organizing the effort to make the movies, you're cool with that. It's the dominant society's seal of approval that makes it where you look at Black Panther as must-see media. Just understand that to them, this is the thin end of the wedge. They've already telegraphed exactly where they intend to go. And don't think that the implosion of Ta-Nehisi Coates and Roxanne Gay's world of gay is somehow going to be the end of this. This is just the start. Black people will be their crash dummies for pushing their agenda. If we allow it. They intend to make us the face of gay lifestyle, not the face of heroism, not the face of high adventure or incredible storytelling, but to make us the ones willing to make encouraging core home socially ubiquitous.
I said the second one,
it's already accepted, but this is going far beyond mere acceptance.
and like your fault, whatever. I said, but, and the other one that knows the other one, he's like the picture. I said, but I have never seen you more happy with Billy since I've known you. Then I said, you ain't stressed?
You ain't tripping?
No, man. But she tired of bullshit from. I said, honey, we already know that I ain't tired of shit.
I apologize right off the bat for those who, in light of recent events, particularly the verdict regarding the murder of Philando Castile, would be looking and saying, why are we talking about this again? And I'm just putting a bookend on this entire whole matter of geek culture vis-a-vis the Black Panther movie, etc. Besides, my second video on the subject got taken down because a lot of the Negro nerds decided they just didn't like it. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to come straight up the middle as usual. Now,
pharmaceuticals.
a lot of the brothers were in shock regarding the comments that I had made. And this goes to the fact that I happen to be older than most of my subscribers, I would venture say. And it also has not missed my notice that a lot of the younger cats out there, they tend to be heavily into quote-unquote geek culture. You see, the reason that I will occasionally reference a movie or a comic book or what have you is because of the fact that I try to reach you where you are. See, when I reference things like Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. If I try to take some references from The Invention of the White Race by Theodore Allen, I'm very reluctant to mention things like Gideon's Spies because, as Dr. John Eric Clark widely observed, a lot of black people would use. A lot of people tell me that they want a reading list. You know, well, if you give us a reading list, as Dr. John Eric Clark said, he had done that for years, decades, and black people would be vaguely intrigued by a reading list, but then they would never go to make themselves actually read it. So they're interested in the abstract, but they're not really serious about it. I've been through that
all I could do was take those books and there's a thing that you can put to where you literally kind of like just wave the pen over the words and it automatically will say the words.
Oh, I see them, yeah.
And so say you don't want to read, you don't feel like you have enough time to read the whole book.
Yeah.
What you do is you sit down one night and you scan the whole book and you listen to it on your iPod.
And unfortunately, it seems we failed to get it across to them because they've watched too much television, read too many comic books. When I was young, the Black Panther Party was still largely relevant. The escapist kumbaya culture that would be ushered in by the white media in the 1980s hadn't been invented yet. And yes, I was born before the 1980s. Most of you, especially the younger ones, you were born before 1980. So I have a perspective on this that you don't. I wasn't raised by comic books and such. Yeah, I watched Transformers growing up, but the truth of the matter is I had already had a lot of people who had gotten the political aspect of things across to me. I didn't invest in it like a lot of you have. And as I said before, I guess the problem happens to be that a lot of young people, especially in a culture that has become more and more atomized and more individualistic, and people just basically trying to create their own little worlds and hide within them. These young people grew up without a whole lot of friends, per se.
I don't know if they're going to be
comic books and movies became their friends. And they fall into that stuff that's very dangerous. Because these comic books and movies are telling you lies. They're convincing you of falsehoods. They're giving you a sugar-coated version of white supremacy, and a lot of you have bought into it. This is not me attempting to pull rank on anyone. And by the way, before I go any farther, I want to say, if anybody in the comment section calls themselves trying to call anybody out or trying to point the finger at anyone in particular, that's going to be instant grounds to get blocked.
Oops.
The only person around here who gets to do that is me.
Thank you.
Now, that said, some of the younger cats, I guess, were a little surprised by what it was that I said. I guess my comments struck a little bit too close to home, which is good. What the hell do you expect? People get killed out here. This is not a game. I don't have time to sit here and just be affectionate, and I'm going to be so attached to comic books and movies and sci-fi and stuff. Man, there's a time for diversion, a small time, and then there's a time to work. Black people are always making excuses for playtime. For black people, it's never the wrong time to be having fun. Doesn't matter if a black man just got shot down in Ferguson, you'll have Negroes dancing in the streets. Same as in Baltimore, New York, Philly, Chicago, D.C. The race soldiers are in front of you with armored vehicles and 60mm machine guns, and here you are dancing a jig. So this mentality is a disease that I am trying to root out, and you younger cats keep making excuses for it.
And to an extent,
damn right I'm going to pull rank on you on this. I am not one of your elders. You already know what I think about elders in the black community, but I am your older brother. And that being the case, I know some things you don't. I understand some things that you don't. And it would behoove you to listen to your elder brothers, especially when they've been right.
I'll tell you something, Jen, you better listen.
You are committing the same mistake that the baby boomers made. The baby boomers were arrogant too. The baby boomers grew up during an age when they watched too much television. You go talk to the average baby boomer who grew up after World War II, and they'll tell you that they were growing up on a steady diet of Howdy Doody and the Mouseketeer Club. That's how a whole bunch of black people, particularly black females, got indoctrinated with the idea that they could be part of the dominant society. They saw Annette Funicello and they thought, that's me up there. Never mind the fact that Walt Disney was a dyed-in-the-wool racist, but guess what? You couldn't tell the baby boomers that. You couldn't tell them anything. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this geek media that so many of you have bought into. Because some of you have only in recent days, I guess, recovered from the comments that I made to the point where you were able to do some sort of video response, or at least some sort of video addition to it, where you had something to say on the issue. And while I do respect some of the people who have made these comments, I also heard some things that I should not have been hearing. Now, again, this is not to start rancor or to create any bad blood. The thing is, the situation's getting real here. And we don't have time for us to be continuing to make the same old mistakes, just tap dancing around the issue, and basically we're going to say, well, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Orlando Castillo was murdered. His murderer got away with it. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. The white media has been aiding and abetting the killers, telling the public we need laws to go after Bill Cosby, but ain't saying a damn thing about laws to go after killer cops. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. The white media, these same TV stations that you see putting out these lies are owned by the exact same companies that own the studios that put out the movies you love, and they own the book companies and publishers that put out the comic books and the novels and every other stuff that you escape into. I don't see white supremacy in isolation. I see the big picture, and I've been trying to get you to do it too, but apparently thinking makes black people's brains hurt. And I'm hearing a bunch of excuses when what I need to be hearing is people taking the hard line. Now, there's an old saying that if there's nothing beneath you, then there's nothing above you either. That's good advice, by the way. Now, for a lot of you out there, a lot of the people who fit to the Negro nerd contingent, by the way, Negro nerds need to be remembered. It's one thing to have a black person who indulges in geek culture from time to time, but for these guys out there who, when you call out the white supremacy in media, whether it's Black Panther, whether it's Star Trek, what have you, if they sit there and defend it and say, well, I don't care, that's a freaking Negro nerd. That's somebody who is completely signed over their autonomy to a white media IP. You ain't much different or much better than a bootleg. In fact, that's what you pretty much are. And the favorite excuse du jour that I keep hearing is, well, brother, it ain't that serious. It's just one movie. Black Panther, just one movie. It's just one movie, so it don't matter. I've heard that from people who I would have thought I would have expected better from. That is exactly the kind of spineless and unthinking garbage that we should never hear in our sphere. Because using your line of logic precious by itself, that's just a movie. And The Blind Side by itself, that was just a movie. And The Butler by itself is just a movie. And The Help was just a movie.
And so on.
And 12 Years a Slave was just a movie. And Hidden Figures was just a movie.
Bullshit.
And you get the idea. You had that recent Tarzan
good.
movie with Samuel Jackson.
The
Here we
Bounty
are in
is
2016, 2017, whatever. And Jaimin Hansu's running around with a bone in his nose.
Who?
A bone in his nose.
Who?
And this was a summer blockbuster that they did this in. This was not some small independent film that they figured
We're talking
would
about
fly under the
movies
radar on
where
Netflix.
you see us being degraded and young motherfuckers will be like, it's just one movie.
Seen everywhere.
It's like,
The
nigga,
way media
stop
thought this was appropriate to put out in the so-called age of Obama. And I got people trying to say that it's just one movie. Now, folks, it is exactly that kind of treasonous self-deception, which is how we came to be enslaved. And this is why our oppression has lasted for so long. And this is why we're still going through it. Black people have spent centuries, indeed millennia, making excuse after excuse for the inexcusable. Because using your logic, Philando Castile was just one black man killed by the police. Eric Garner was just one. And Freddie Gray, and Sandra Bland, and Alpha Brazil, and Tamir Rice, and Michael Brown, and Walter Scott, and Jamar Clark. You see, those were all just a bunch of one-offs, too. And they don't really matter in the grand scheme of things taken individually, except we are all willing to admit that these are not individual events. They are part of a string of murders, and that they are all related and part of a systematic, deliberate pattern of white hostility against us, and that we can't afford to pretend like those are isolated incidents. Or rather, I guess those incidents are so severe, no one's willing to say that it's just one killer. All but the most stupid recognize it for what it is. But do you see how idiotic it sounds when you try to look at any particular incident in white supremacy and isolation? You got a society that's under complete control by one entity. That being the case, it is not unfair to say that in most cases you really can subscribe to a unified theory for things. Unified theory, for those of you who don't know, and I'm not going to recommend any books on it because I know you won't read them, but for any of you out there who wonder, unified theory basically means one cause for a whole bunch of things. You know, it's kind of like how white supremacy tries to have a unified theory about black people. It rained in Cincinnati today. Must be because of black people. But people who want to ignore reality, especially when they are under attack, when you see that the propaganda arm of white supremacy is taking aim at you, and you decide that you're going to go ahead and rationalize it away and say that it's okay regardless, that is not dangerous, it's treasonous. People who are unable to read context into things, just big, simple stuff that's right in front of you, these people are also totally incapable of analyzing anything either. And what a surprise, these are the very people who insist on doing the most talking in our community. We got a lot of folks who speak when they most need to be quiet. They defend the very things that are openly mocking us, and mockery in the society toward an ethnic minority is dangerous because it always lays the foundation for attacks. White supremacy is constantly, whenever we hit back, which is few and far between, they will retreat, regroup, and come back from a different angle. They keep on trying it. They keep putting the poison in a candy coating. And too many of us make excuses for it. And apparently can't see the problem with that. We refuse to see the clear patterns no matter how obvious they are. We never call things out, and we never get wise to the scam. Now, since so many of you geeks like movies so much, perhaps you should have paid attention to a movie in particular that I cite a scene from, The Departed. Martin Sheen is recruiting Leonardo DiCaprio to be part of an undercover police unit, and he tells the young rookie, we practice deception here, but what we don't practice is self-deception. And all of you geeks and Negro nerds and what have you, who are making excuses for the mess that's coming down the pike next February, you guys fall in the latter category.
That's good work. The pay's good too.
You need to keep your eyes open. And in fact, you should get it tattooed on the inside of your eyelids. We don't practice self-deception. People who have conned themselves are very difficult to argue with. It's very difficult to convince them of reality. Primarily, it's because they bought into a con, and people tend to become emotionally invested in decisions that they make. But the second reason is they're so hard to reach because they're gullible. And gullibility is not simply that you are deceived. A lot of people are deceived in a lot of things. Gullibility is a unique type of deception because of the fact that people who are gullible tend to be unusually susceptible to lies. For some reason, they tend to have an affinity for falsehoods. They just keep falling for it. They don't just easily believe the truth. They easily believe lies. That's the definition of gullible. It's somebody who can tell this idiot anything and he'll go for it. See, gullibility is where stuff like, it's just one movie comes from. That's the kind of thinking that leads to a statement like that. None of these things is happening in a vacuum, folks. They are all part of a non-stop parade of black denigration. And any other time, these black geeks would acknowledge that. They usually do, but apparently they seem to think that white supremacy stops at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. White supremacy matters, white supremacy exists, that is, unless Captain America and Iron Man are part of it. So apparently, how nice to know the solution for white supremacy is Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans. If only we had known this sooner. The cure for white supremacy is Tony Stark. If only we had known this sooner. For 100 years, the white media's movies have produced a steady, non-stop drumbeat of images and stories that show black people as slaves, mammies, dumb brutes, buffoons who need white people. Now, for years, we had all been in lockstep, more or less, saying that nothing under white supremacy, especially not the white media, is happening in isolation. That is a concerted effort being put out by an organized anti-black racist front. We understood that we were up against a coordinated effort being carried out by an organized group who know exactly what they're doing, and that no matter how benign they may claim these images and so-called stories are, that it is nothing but anti-black propaganda, full stop. We were all admitting that, hey, these ain't one-offs, this is part of an onslaught by the white media. But not anymore, though. Apparently all you gotta do is put Patrick Boseman in some spandex and have some CGI with him, and all of a sudden, well, that's different, though. This is different. That's what idiots said about Will Smith, too. Now, it's only now that some people are willing to admit that a lot of that stuff Will Smith's been doing was just straight up bootleg. It may not have been the most ultra form, it's not as bad as some of the crap that we've seen from Tyler Perry, or some of the garbage that we saw from Ving Rhames, but that don't change what the hell it is. Last time I checked, dog crap doesn't stink any worse than horse crap. But some of you seem to think the horse crap smells sweeter than most. Those slave and black subservient movies that I listed, they are part of the effort by the white media to indoctrinate, and the indoctrination has clearly taken. These are 24 frames per second, big budget, star-studded, anti-black propaganda films. They are put out by the most powerful men in media. Who the hell do you think the Weinsteins are? Who the hell do you think Disney is? Oh, so Disney is racist when they put out the Princess Frog. You can't have a black prince there. Disney is racist when they don't have black people in any of their kids' fare. Oh, but they're not racist when they have black people running around in grass skirts and pink lips. Well, just so long as it's part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You cannot compare the output of even new black media to what's put out by the white media studios. Because when you try to claim that it's just one movie, you're ignoring reality. A reality that up until this last week you used to acknowledge. And the fact that you would claim anything in the white media is happening in a vacuum ought to make you pause before giving your opinion in the future. If you got this one wrong, then simply put your blind in the dark. Brothers and sisters, it is not wise for us to go listening to every Tom, Dick, and Harriet who claims to be on our side. Everyone says that they want off the plantation, but it's not until after you tell them that they have to leave, and they realize, I gotta make my own butter biscuits, and I gotta make my own chitlins. And you find out who really wants off the plantation as opposed to who just wants massa to be a little less brutal towards them. The goal of black empowerment is not to have less white supremacy or to have less anti-black violence. The goal of black empowerment is to have none whatsoever. It is to get rid of it. It is to eradicate white supremacy, to eradicate anti-black anything. Dr. John Henry Clark once related the old tale about the boy who saw his grandmother churning butter. And since butter churners are essentially buckets that don't allow you to see what's going on inside, the boy, naturally curious, asked his grandmother, which churn is it that's the one that produces the butter? Now, to this little boy, that seemed to be an intelligent question. It's cute coming from a child because he doesn't know. But to him, it just makes sense that, well, it must be one in particular that does the magic, right? And his grandmother had to inform him, no, grandson, it's all of them that produce the butter. Which one produces the butter? They all do. White supremacy, anti-black racism is the exact same way. It's no one incident, no one person, no one movie that produces white supremacy. They all do. You have to see it as part of a whole because that's how the bad guys see it. Kevin Feige tells you that he's got Marvel Phase 1, Marvel Phase 2, Marvel Phase 3. He has DisneyCon where they hold an entire convention telling you slow coasts that, hey, we got a plan laid out, a roadmap. You have the people who used to work on those Marvel movies like Joss Whedon and like Jon Favreau saying, hey, I had to leave because they put us in a straitjacket. They were dictating to us what we could and could not do. We had simple ideas, simple things we wanted to do, things that would not have changed direction from the Infinity War, and Marvel said, forget it, we're not doing any of that. They were dictating terms to people. And yet a lot of you still lie and say, well, Ryan Coogler and that black screenwriter on Black Panther, with his, white wife, by the way. Well, these guys, they got to write whatever they wanted. It was written by a black man. No, it wasn't. The way that movies work, and I'm going to reiterate this for those of you who don't know, movies primarily begin with a producer. Now, the producer can either be a studio executive, or in the case of, say, like Jerry Bruckheimer, he can be an independent man with enough clout that studios will listen to. The way that it works is a studio executive or a producer has the idea for the movie. And what he will do is he will essentially get the studio to say, we like this idea. And from there, he is given a small amount of money to go recruit a screenwriter to write the actual script based on the producer's idea. What do you think the producer does? The screenwriter is approached by the producer. It's very rare in Hollywood these days, especially in the era of tentpoles. It's very difficult for a screenwriter to say, here's my script, will you make it a movie? Now, after the producer has what he feels to be an adequate enough first draft, he then presents that to the studio, and they will quote-unquote green light the movie. That means now they're ready to go into development. They're going to start commissioning more drafts from the writer, and they always give notes. For those of you who don't know anything about the movie business and desperately wish you did, that's what they do. They give you notes. No screenwriter is allowed to just write whatever the hell he wants. As you turn in one draft after the other, the studio will give you notes telling you this is what you're going to change now. That's how the movie business actually works. You don't get to write what you want. And when you're a director, what happens is you have dailies. The dailies are sent to the studio so they can see what the hell it is you're doing. And the producer will either be whispering in your ear, this won't cut. What that means is there's going to be editing problems, or if the studio executives, they'll look and say, we're going to make some more notes on the production of the movie itself. Now, you would know this if you actually read interviews with directors themselves. DVDs have commentaries from the director. They talk about it all the time. Screenwriters who have commentaries on DVD talk about it all the time. You can see interviews on YouTube with screenwriters talking about how the process actually works. But most of you don't know and don't care. And yet you open your mouths to talk anyway. You don't know how the movies that you watch get made. Oh, but you will tell us how they get made. You just don't know how. That's all. See, it is dangerous for you to go listening to people who don't know a damn thing. To have your sensibilities informed by the ignorant, the willfully ignorant, the hopelessly gullible. Critical thinking is not a skill that's widely practiced or cherished in our community. Even among those who practice it, not many do it well. But since we live in an age where idiocy is freely distributed, you can get famous being a moron, everyone seems to think that giving their uninformed opinion is the same as giving an irrefutable fact, and it's not. A slap to the face isn't that serious, so long as it's one, right? But how about 2 slaps to the face? How about 2 in a single day? Or how about 1 slap every day of the week? At what point do you draw the line? When do we say that, this might be something we should take seriously? Where's the line at? I'd love to know, because it's interesting how all these geeks can't tell you, now isn't it? Remember what I said about there is no line that white supremacy can cross that these geeks would consider to be too far? There is no point at which they would draw the line in the sand and say, white supremacy cannot step over this line. There's no line for them. White supremacy can just keep on marching. And indeed it has. Now there's one brother, not calling out any names, no need to, I'm speaking to principles here, not to people. But there was one brother in particular who said something that I could not believe, because I would have thought he would have known better. He said that we shouldn't excoriate the Black Panther movie because apparently even criticizing it is to give it publicity. Now that, as Dr. Diop once said, I suppose that makes a certain amount of sense, not that it makes good sense. If all publicity is good publicity, then tell me, how did that Fantastic Four movie with Michael B. Jordan pan out? Because you see, there were a lot of people who were absolutely livid about that one, lost their minds about that one. They raised, a lot of white geeks raised pure hell about that. So, all publicity is essentially good publicity, but it all adds to the notoriety of a film. Makes it where people hear about it, right? So the Fantastic Four movie was a blockbuster, now was it? Oh, that's right, it died over opening week. You see, the bad guys waged open racist war on that, and it didn't do so well, right? I'm using your logic here. See, the pale males got in line and they attacked. If any publicity is essentially good publicity, which is the argument that this person made, in essence, then I'm sure that Nick Parker will enjoy his next big budget project, right? Because he got a lot of publicity, a lot of people talking about the birth of a nation. So a lot of people talking about it was essentially helping that film, right? See, this is part of the problem that we have. You got a lot of people who basically have a debate strategy, a thought process of fire, ready, aim. That's not the way that you analyze anything. Not an individual event, and not a macrocosm either. See, this isn't about what the dominant society is going to do, it's about what we are going to do. Those of us who have proven that we understand the past and can accurately predict where trends are going, we're the voices to be listened to. Others making excuses for the status quo should not be listened to. The situation is too serious for us to do otherwise. If I see something that is wrong, I don't make excuses for it. I attack it. That's called principle. There are no sacred cows for me under white supremacy. Because too many sacred cows are nothing more than white cave beasts in a freaking cow's skin. I'm ready to turn all sacred cows to hamburger. And you should be too. Do not trust anything that comes to you from any of the arms of white supremacy. If the administrative arm says we got ourselves a 13th Amendment here, and all y'all niggers is free, don't believe it. If they say, hey, here's the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and hey, here's a follow-up in 65, see, all of you niggers can vote now, don't believe it. The white media says, hey, here's a vision of a colorblind world where racism doesn't exist. Everyone's judged by the quality of their character, not the color of their skin. Don't believe it. If the police say we are highly trained and we don't racially profile, don't believe it. Perhaps it's because I'm of a certain age, but I don't make excuses for what I see. Now, millennials grew up on escapist fantasy. The faux colorblind nonsense that was started in the 1960s. And it died out shortly after the death of Dr. King, and kind of had this miasma in the 1970s. The Black Panthers and such kind of kept it at bay. The white colorblind garbage was crippled for a decade. But starting with the ascendancy of Ronald Senile Reagan, the white media felt, okay, it's time to go ahead and start ginning up the old propaganda machine. So in the 1980s and 90s, the escapist fantasy reached a fever pitch, and a lot of you were born and raised on that nonsense. And it's obvious that while some of us were getting into news from an early age, while some of us had parents who didn't park us in front of the electronic babysitter, while some of us had parents who required us to read and to watch something other than cartoons and didn't let cartoons become our friends, while we were taught to question and mistrust the white media, you younger cats were taught to worship it. You were allowed for white supremacy to creep into your mind. What's that old saying about the eyes are the windows of the soul? Well, the problem is the window goes both ways. The eyes allow people to see what's going on inside of you, but it also allows other people to put ideas inside your head. And that's exactly what's happening. Many of you who unfortunately do not think before you speak and use words without bothering to figure out what they actually mean. You say things and it's clear that you don't know what you're talking about because you'll say, well, these movies, I need it as a diversion.
Hey, what's up? How can I help? Okay, I'll get you out of trouble. No problem.
Basically, I need to have something else. No,
The cats were in here for knuckleheads.
is an instance of turning something aside from its course. An instance. But the secondary definition is an alternate route.
Use one of the little heating
When the
guns.
usual road is temporarily
Yeah, not too
closed.
bad.
Now, right, wait till I get a movie.
That's what diversion means.
You know, I just put
What
the
it means
magazines
is,
in.
I'm supposed to be doing some work out in the woodshed. I'm supposed to be doing some architectural work, but it's a little bit tedious for me. You know, kind of got some brain fatigue going on. So I'm going to take a break. It's going to be something aside from the course, but I'm going to get back on track. That's what diversion means. Diversion does not mean that I'm going to go ahead and take this side road and stay on it, and I'm going to go somewhere else entirely. What it means is I'm getting off the road for an instance. I'm not going to be staying off the road. You see, I guess the problem for me is I look at everything through the prism of how does it serve my own personal interest. When I look at the media, I'm not looking at going, oh, I need some more fun time, some more leisure time. That is one of the big psychological loopholes that human beings have. Once we start goofing off, we tend to want to stay goofing off. Work is hard, play is easy. And we prefer play because why put out more effort than you have to? Might as well do something you truly enjoy from beginning to end as opposed to something that you'll only enjoy once it's finished. That's dangerous. Because oppressors will turn that against you. They'll make you where the only real thing you can do other than when they're beating you with a whip is going to be goofing off. You better not be planning how you're going to get that whip out of Bass's hands, though. When I look at the media, any sort of media, am I able to enjoy, because a lot of you are bitching and complaining because you're children in your mentality. And you go, well, you probably don't like nothing, do you? Now, how the hell can you say that when I've told you that I like the TV show Deadwood, had problems with it. I have problems with all white media, by the way, because of its source. But I told you that I like Deadwood. I told you that I grew up watching Transformers, and that was my favorite cartoon as a child. And I told you that there are also movies that I can quote to you from liberally. I know the names of screenwriters. See, you actually needed me to tell you the names of these people. You didn't know who the hell they were. All right? I actually, believe it or not, I follow all of this media stuff so I can dissect it. I'm aware of media, I've consumed media, but I don't invest in media. Because I understand that all media, I see media from the same standpoint as the people who produce the media. You know, those white guys who are not about to let you show a movie with white people in grass skirts who play lips. The white people who tell you that it's just a movie and they put that idiotic line in your mouth and you just regurgitate it without thinking. The same white people who've been putting out images denigrating us for 100 years in media. The same ones who declared D.W. Griffith's Netflix's Birth of a Nation to be the greatest film of all time, the American Film Institute. I see things from their perspective in that I look at media as only being useful to the extent that it can promote my power. A TV show is fine. Having a sci-fi show or a sci-fi movie is fine, but only to the extent that it promotes my value system. If a particular program or a particular work does not promote my value system, then it is meaningless. At best, it's empty calories, which means I really ought to be doing something else. Or at worst, it is an intolerable offense that I must call out and must attack. But it's a binary equation. Do I look at this and see things that forward my value system? If not, then what the hell am I doing? See, a lot of you were allowed to grow into this bad behavior. You were constantly allowed to go ahead and chase after media that mocks and ridicules you and continues white supremacy through its propaganda army. You never were taught to challenge it, and now here you are openly defending it. You were indoctrinated with this garbage from infancy. I, on the other hand, was not. To me, nothing in media is except that which promotes my power. Sure, you can have an engrossing storyline. Sure, you can have interesting characters. Sure, you can have exciting and dynamic set pieces, and you can have some flashy, razzle-dazzle CGI. But if you've got a black bootlick, or a black buffoon, or a black woman who's sitting here kissing some white dude's feet, then that, to me, gets the point across that this is not a piece of media that needs to exist. And you have black people in their 20s and 30s, who I guess because they're out of their underoos, well, at least publicly anyway, they figure because they're not in middle school anymore, they think they sound smart defending this crap. That's the danger here. It would be one thing if you were kids, but I guess because you figure, well, I'm not a child anymore, yeah, at least not physically. I'm in my 20s. What are you talking about? I'm in my 30s. I'm in my 30s. How you gonna question me? I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, just like the elders in the black community who ain't worth a damn because they don't think you fall in the same category now. The white media taught you all of that mealy-mouthed crap that you say, and it presented it to you in your childhood as being a moral position, and it's not. The white media had a vested interest in teaching oppressed people that you ought to take the gentle path, take the high road. You don't want to play blame on anything. So you really should give everything a pass. We don't want to be judgmental. Well, except for somebody who comes along and says, we need to have standards. Now, you can be very declarative on that. Always equivocate. You need to look up that word, by the way. I know you won't, so I'll do it for you. Equivocate means to use ambiguous language so as to conceal the truth or avoid committing oneself. And that has been exactly what you've done regarding this Black Panther movie and geek culture in general. And that's the reason why I'm going to want to get to a larger subject of geek culture where blacks are concerned. Black Panther, my criticism of it, just opened up floodgates. You didn't just defend that movie, you defended everything about geek culture, just all across the board. All of it's okay. You're imitating your white counterparts. You see, they have the luxury of waffling on issues because nobody's attacking them. But when it comes time to choose a side and squad up, they always choose white while you're still trying to walk the middle of the road. See, they don't play that game of, well, we've got to be non-judgmental and everything is everything. They're like, no. They didn't do that with the Fantastic Four movie. Didn't do that with the Birth of a Nation. You see, if nothing is unacceptably wrong to you, then that also means nothing can be absolutely right either. That is a surefire formula for maintaining the status quo in perpetuity. Now, a lot of you out there, you younger guys, because you've been listening to people like myself who have our heads on straight, you've just learned that maybe you should excoriate the baby boomers because they wasted years that amounted to decades chasing dreams of integration. They've been on a 70-year-long vacation from reality. They just had these delusions that one day they were going to join this or that white fraternity or sorority, the Elks Club, whatever. There are white folks over here. Who are they going to let me in one of these days? I'm as good as them. I just need them to understand that I'm as good as them. well as the baby boomers die off, they waste their last pathetic breath still pursuing this fool's errand. Now, we fully understand them to be so pathetic. They chased a mirage since they were young, and now they're all but dead. And nothing to show for it. Even their children don't respect them. But apparently some of you are too tense to understand that you've gone and done the exact same thing. History has now repeated itself. You grew up wanting to be a Marvel superhero, or to be one of the characters that you saw in a Japanese cartoon. Or at the very least, if you couldn't get that, you'd settle for being the black sidekick. Just let me be part of your story world, please. And now you're adults, still chasing that mirage, and like the boomers, you're not going to have anyone tell you that there's something wrong with that. I don't know, maybe here's the analogy that I'm going to go ahead and use. We'll see if this one flies over your heads. Let's say that there's a house, and the house belongs to a couple of white guys named Stan and Jack. Now, Stan, and Jack Kirby, Jack, they don't allow any black people in their house, though they do have a couple of pictures of black people up in their house. And outside the house stand some black misfits who played with their Power Ranger toys a little bit too long. They see some of the Biff Bam Pow stuff going on inside of the house that Stan and Jack built. And it's all stuff that's done with resources stolen from the people outside, but the people outside never conned on to this. They never figured out the scam. And they look at what's going on inside the house that Stan and Jack built, and they're envious. Now, Stan and Jack aren't about to let you in their house. You can't influence a single thing that goes on inside of it. You haven't gotten one dime from that house. They don't listen to you, and they're not going to. And the closest thing to a black person in their house are a couple of very small pictures of black people, which are there as an afterthought, and never as large as the ones of the white guys on the wall. That point seems to always be lost on you. And yet these black people who are on the outside, who are largely ignored by the two white guys in the house, and who can't influence anything inside the house, they have somehow convinced themselves that what's going on inside the house that Stan and Jack built somehow has something to do with them. And that's really amazing, considering that they're acting like they're getting paid to adore what's going on inside of Stan and Jack's house. As if Marvel's success, the house that Stan and Jack built success, is theirs too. Stan and Jack aren't about to let you into their house. All you can do is stand outside and wish you were one of the tiny black pictures at the bottom of their wall. So Professor Truth comes along and tells you to stop idolizing people who mistreat you and denigrate you. Professor Truth tells you that it's not right that you should stand outside in the cold, giving your money to people who ignore you and mock you with a smile on their faces. I tell you that you're able to build your own house, and that you can have your own pictures on those walls, and you can have things going on inside your house a hell of a lot better than anything going on inside the house that Jack and Stan built. I tell you that it's your duty to build your own house so that you would have one of your own, that you need to have one of your own. And what's the reply that we get from these dumb geeks? You just don't want us to have anything, huh? Wow, I tell you to get your own house, get your own pictures, get your own events. First thing you say is, you don't want me to have anything. Well, this is the kind of garbage that we hear from self-professed adults. I tell you to build your own house, and you say, well, that's not having anything. Now you've said the truth now. You've gone ahead and told me exactly what's going on inside your empty head. You've made a confession. If you're not able to drool in front of Stan and Jack's house, as far as you're concerned, you don't have anything at all. That's the confession you just got through making. Look at the comment section from the people in the other video that I did about Black Panther, and that's the main thing that you see. And some of these people who call themselves posting replies, this is one of the lines that they use. Well, you just don't want us to have anything. No, I want you to have one of your own. That's exactly the problem. You don't have anything right now, and I'm telling you, get your own. Black Panther ain't yours, stupid. hand-me-down clothes from racists? And don't you deserve better than table scraps given to you by a degenerate who disrespects and abuses you? That you deserve a house bigger and more luxurious than Massa, a house of your own. And what's your reply to that? Man, you just don't want us to have nothing, do you? No, you're the one who doesn't want you to have anything. And because you've chosen to be willing accomplices in your own enslavement, you won't have anything. You've now gone on the record that you want to stay on the white media's treadmill. You idiots keep letting them get you to chase the carrot on a stick. You're never smart enough to the scam. You never accept the fact that the goal of the white media has always been to get you to have a better image of white supremacy and a worse one of yourself. Their objective has always been to keep you pursuing a carrot that you will never get. We live in a sad age, an age of immaturity, an age of foolishness that desperately tries to masquerade as being intelligence. Now, to be sure, much of this immaturity has been promoted by the white media, as I said, because a childish population is also an easily controlled one. But we have to take responsibility for our education. Nobody's going to educate. I'm not going to do it. Education is something you have to do for yourself, but you have to be honest in order to be educated. See, when you're dishonest, you don't get education. At best, you'll only get indoctrination. Tell me something that agrees with what I already believe. And giving infantile rationalizations for real-world problems, never presenting reasons why something is right, so you just give flimsy rationales. And you figure that merely giving a reply to something is the same as disproving it, and it's not. It's a total lack of common sense. And nowhere is this lack of common sense more evident than when you give someone a solid reason why some form of media is either false or blatantly degrading, and that person simply comes back with, oh, you don't want us to have nothing. But there is another lie that they tell, and this one has become a personal favorite of mine because it is so mind-blowingly stupid. Oh, you don't want to see this movie? Well, you're going to miss out on this. You're missing out on all the cool stuff. Really retarded, Robbie? So if I miss out on a big-budget insult, somehow that's hurting me. Meanwhile, you stupid are giving them your money, giving them your time so they can insult you. And apparently, that's not hurting you at all. You see, using that line of crap, it has become very popular among the brain dead. They use that line of reasoning, if it can be called that. Well, based on that, you could call any movie cool, any movie at all. And if people say that they don't want to see for some reason, you can tell them, well, you're missing out on something cool. Let me tell you something stupid. Racist is a fact, not an opinion. Coolness is an opinion, not a fact. I don't want to see the movie Precious. Oh, you're missing out on a cool movie then. I don't want to see D.W. Griffin's Birth of a Nation. Well, you're missing out on a cool movie. By the way, these are things that these brain-dead zombies have actually said in regards to these very movies. This crap about, well, you're going to miss out on all the cool stuff in life, that's become something of a go-to line for the morally bankrupt and the mentally conditioned. You declare your uninformed, retarded opinion like a fact and then say that everyone else is disadvantaged because they don't think of something stupid as being cool like you do. They're not able to laugh off insults, so apparently that's not cool. What kind of inbred magical thinking is this? Well, that's precisely the point. It's not thinking at all. It's pure, blind, unthinking. And that's the main thing here. Don't put down my Black Panther love. You don't understand how this movie makes me feel. They haven't even seen the damn thing, but they already know they love it. It's perfect, sight unseen. Well, it doesn't take much to please the idiots, now does it? These clowns are the lowest form of life. These are gluttons for punishment. So if I I refuse to go see something that I condemn as uncool, I'm missing out on something cool. That's the logic. These aren't babies, these are retards. About the only bit of truth that President Obama ever told was about gas prices. When he used that phrase, shock and trance. They raised gas prices, which shocks the public, then they lowered them only a little bit. And people don't even realize that the gas prices have now become higher. They're just not as high as they were a minute ago. The momentary reduction of prices is just enough to get the people to calm down, even though they fully realize, and they will admit that the prices are now higher than they had been before, and that they're not going to go back to down to what they were before and never will. Too many of us keep hoping that the white media will one day promote our image, when I keep telling you that that's not what they were invented to do. You get angry that they're going to give you one or two TV shows, though it's going to be as bedwetches, bootlicks, or sidekicks. You get to be the convict who owns a record label, or one of their sexually confused kids, and you'll be so happy to get that because, hey, it's better than nothing. That's one that I saw in the comment sections too. Idiots saying it's better than nothing. And to them, this is progress. You know, 100 years ago, radio was the dominant media, and the hottest thing on radio was Amos and Andy. In fact, Amos and Andy was so popular, did you know that the crime rate actually dropped during the hour or so that Amos and Andy was on? The dominant society has never had a problem putting black people front and center so long as we look ridiculous. I always told you the best way to con anyone is to let them con themselves. Some of you are so silly, you've conned yourself into thinking that this Black Panther movie is going to open some sort of floodgate, or at least it might open some doors. Oh, you mean the same way that Amos and Andy opened some doors? Well, tell me something. Can you name any black director doors have opened for in Hollywood? When did the doors open for Spike Lee? When did the doors open for Antoine Fuqua? How about Clark Johnson? How about F. Gary Gray? How about Ice Cube? When are the doors going to open? Ice Cube still makes these video. Whenever he's in a movie that he's supposed to be starring in, he has the same freaking budget that he had back in 1993 or whatever with Friday. $20 million. Hollywood has frozen the budget that they give to black directors for the last 25 years. You're going to get more than $20 million. $20 million only allows you to make a low-budget flick. You're not making the next Matrix for $20 million. Doors don't open for you. It's the one Negro at a time rule, stupid. And there's also another bit of psychological warfare that the white media is doing. Everybody knows about the Wonder Woman movie that's been in theaters, and apparently is doing pretty well. There was a little bit of a dust-up, I don't know why. Apparently some movie theater, Alamo Drafthouse, I think it was, said that they were going to be having women-only screenings. Now, Alamo Drafthouse is not like AMC, and as long as they keep, basically playing favors with their audience members, they never will be. They're not a nationwide chain. They're only in certain cities, large cities, but they're a specialty outlet. And apparently, this women-only screenings of Wonder Woman was popular in a couple of their venues. Now, while Wonder Woman has been a financial success, at least it made its money back, but it's got revenues lower than Suicide Squad or Man of Steel, it still made like $450 million worldwide at last count. And this is being attributed to the fact that there's huge interest from women who see this Wonder Woman movie as more than just a movie. Never mind the fact that Warner Brothers executives are almost exclusively men. Never mind the fact that it's men who produced the movie. Never mind the fact that any success that Wonder Woman has is going to simply boost the other male franchises around her. But the phrase that's been kicked around a lot to describe this bizarre intersection of geek culture and pseudo-social activism is, it's a movement movie. By the way, that came from the white media themselves. Their PR people put that out there as a means to encourage these emails to, you have to go see this movie. This is relevant to you. This is empowering for you. Yeah, putting money in somebody else's pocket. That's always the way you empower yourself. Making somebody else rich. That's the road to empowerment. The studios are laughing at the geeks, all of them. Black geeks, female geeks, misfits, patronizing them by telling them that it's important to you that you come see our movie and pay us for it. They see these nerds as useless eaters, as just a bunch of ghosts floating through life who don't matter, clowns who desperately wish that somebody would take them seriously on anything. And it never dawns on them that their behavior and their mentality is the reason that no one takes them seriously. And even though box office-wise Wonder Woman isn't necessarily setting the world on fire, it's not doing any better than, say, the last Hunger Games movie. The studios understand that psychologically masturbating the geeks and losers was a great way to boost sales for the same old vapid comic book crap. Because you make it personally relevant to the clowns. And this is the only floodgate that's open. Instead of the white media saying that this character on the movie screen is like you, now they're saying that it is you. When Wonder Woman debuted at #1, the female geeks in particular were ecstatic. First of all, it had no competition at the box office, so the #1 debut didn't mean a lot. But when your life, such as it is, revolves around buying someone else's comic books and someone else's movies, all you can do is hope someone notices what you buy. What did Dr. Claude Anderson say? Have you ever seen a junkie say, "I've got crack power"? He's just a customer. What power does he have? The white media is manipulating you. They know it, and on some level I think you know it too, but the difference is they actually get something out of it, while all you get to do is merely con yourself into thinking that you're getting something. When someone insults you or patronizes you and you pay them for that, that is an L that you just took, and you don't even realize it. Black people are always the last to figure out that they got played, and when we do figure it out, usually years and years later, we then want to get all butthurt about it. But it's too late then. We keep walking into these bear traps with our eyes wide open and telling every pathetic lie we can to think of to justify this foolishness. And don't give me any more crap about how you need a reprieve from the relentless assault of white supremacy. I've been to your YouTube channels. I've held my nose and read some of your Facebook feeds too. All you ever talk about is comics and movies. This isn't a diversion for you. These things are your way of life. Judging by your own online interests, what you yourself spend your time on, I would think that racism didn't exist to see you tell it. You sure as hell don't seem to acknowledge it very much. Now, whether or not Black Panther is a good movie, to you, that's the most important issue of the day. Oh, I can't wait. I'm ecstatic. Can't wait. I'm on pins and needles. Can't wait. When the white media's got you peeing your pants and acting like a 5-year-old to see one of their movies, that's when they got you. And there are some people who, when I see them comment on this video, I'm going to go ahead and put the spotlight on them, just to let them know you may think that you can talk one kind of way when you're on my channel, and then you'll be exactly 180 degrees opposite on another, but it hasn't gone without notice. That's what's come out of this, and it has been damn good. We're separating the fakers from the faithful. I hate white supremacy. Not part of it, not most of it, but all of it. And it isn't merely for what it's done against me, but most importantly for what it's done to my
I've sent the collection point to your GPS. Make the pickup and bring the goods to the warehouse. Should be straightforward.
I look at all of it through the eyes of contempt. When I sit watching something, I'm looking at it and go, I don't give a dang how truthful it is. It can be whatever your favorite white liberal is. It can be something you even agree with. I'm still looking at it going, this came from the white media. Man, ain't this some bull crap? Even if it's bull crap that I agree with, it's still bull crap. Now, if the only time you seem to have a problem with white supremacy is when Tamir Rice is killed or when Philando Castile's murderer gets away with it, then you don't really have a problem with white supremacy. If the only time you're willing to acknowledge the white media's denigration of us is if it's not a comic book movie, then you don't really have a problem with the white media. If you're looking for excuses and opportunities to believe the white media, then to all intents and purposes, you are part of the white media. You're part of their cheerleading squad. The propaganda arm of white supremacy is always working against us. Doesn't matter if it's the news, or if it's ESPN, which is owned by Disney, by the way, or a Marvel movie, which is also owned by Disney. Disney's sitting here spoon-feeding you crap on ESPN, Disney Channel, Marvel movies, Marvel comic books, and you seem to think, well, as long as it's the comic books, it's okay. White media is pure propaganda, operating in their interest, not yours. Anytime someone speaks truth on a a white media outlet, that is not part of the plan. They allow it either to try to discredit that person or they talk over them so that you don't really get to hear it. And when you decide that you're going to defend some part of white media, I mean, when a black man speaks against the white media, the first thing you do is attack him. That's no different than a black man speaking against a white politician and you take the white politician's side. You can name on one hand the numbers of times that they accidentally let truth be spoken on a white media outlet.
Why, hello, how you doing? How can I help? Okay, so you're in serious trouble, and you need my help. Okay.
Has anything the white media put out there ever been harmless? You agree that their cartoons teach racism? Well, at least the old ones do. You don't see an Ancestral problem with the ones after 1980. You agree that their TV shows teach it? Well, as long as it ain't a sci-fi show. You agree that their movies teach it, so long as it's not part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe or DC. You agree that their news shows teach it? Well, as long as it ain't Rachel Maddow, or as long as it ain't Roland Martin sometimes, right? From time to time, it becomes necessary to reaffirm what a particular group is about. What the value system is has to be reaffirmed, not only to your opponents, but also to those who claim to be your allies. Now, what is the purpose of this whole thing that I do? I'll tell you once again, it is to take control of the cultural discourse within our community and to elevate the debate. The key words there being control and elevation. We challenge white supremacy. We spent thousands of years retreating from it, though, in Africa and now worldwide, and no one outside of Haiti has ever had the guts to say, no more running, we draw the line here. Well, in this place, with me, we do draw the line. But people expect me to compromise. Let me tell you something. White supremacy will never stop trying to abuse and now at this point annihilate us. That's the reason why I don't compromise on anything. White disease is a pandemic. That means it covers the globe. It affects every arena of the society. While we are not able to separate ourselves from it just yet, the very least we can do is be truthful about it and not become attached to it. I regard white supremacy the same way that I regard someone else's ideas. They're not mine, hence they require examination. Everyone's familiar with the story of Lot's wife, and by the way, do not post any garbage about, we ain't Christians, brother. Lot's wife looked back when it was time to leave Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, people think that her sin was that she was still wanting to continue the sinful culture of those cities. Well, that was part of it. But the real sin that Lot's wife committed was that she refused to put herself first. Sodom and Gomorrah did a lot of things, mostly perverted. The one thing that those two cities would never do is to build anything. Hedonistic losers wasting their lives chasing trivial, prurient fun. Sounds like some Negro nerds we can think of, huh? There was work to be done, a future to be built, and you can't do that fornicating all day. And be honest, if there wasn't God who destroyed that place, it would have been some invading army. Wrecking Sodom and Gomorrah, destroying that place was the biggest favor anyone ever did for them. I mean, it's not like they were going anywhere. I guess the problem for me is that I'm too selfish. I can't take pride in what someone else possesses, even if they tell me that I should. Because they can and will flip the script or have to throw some salt in the game first chance they get, and that chance always comes. I want control. I can't get enthused about anyone else's political party, anyone else's military, or anyone else's intellectual property. To me, black first is my religion. And the things I say here aren't just rhetoric, they are articles of my faith. I can be in this white man's world, but I'll be damned if I ever allow myself to become a part of this white man's world. I won't defend any part of it because it's not mine. I draw the line with them, and I draw the line with you. One of our problems is that we always allow everyone to speak. And as a result, we give everyone's words equal weight. Doesn't matter if it's Dr. Clark or Crispy the Crackhead. We're directionless because we allow for everything. No one is ever told that they're wrong, and nobody gets to be right either. Well, that day is done. We know what's wrong here, and we know what's in our interests. If I spit on any of the trappings or the creations of white supremacy, and you move to speak for or to defend them, then you're not with me.
You want to put it in there?
And when the white media, who you throw your lot in with, finally puts an end to your playtime and decides that they want you to go, when you figure out that, whoops, I need to be black first again, just remember, you don't have any friends over here. You let your comic books and your cartoons given to you by the white media be your friends. So that's who you better call on, and that's who you better go running to when the good white folks decide that reality is finally going to start dropping on you and kicking your behind all over again.
As it was said, so shall it be. I don't play around with this shit. It's serious as can be. Shoulin4every, out this motherfucker. Professor BlackTruth, dropping knowledge as usual. You better understand white supremacy coming for your ass. Understand there's no shape, form, or fashion unless you own it. Don't praise it. Until next time, like, share, subscribe. Yikes.